Okay. Hi everyone. I'd like to introduce the talk Before Print with Stephanie Tang, Kenny X. Lee, Feng Ho Yin, and Lao Ching Ping. Kenny, why don't you start by introducing yourself?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Kenny Lee, and I'm a Hong Kong-based photographer, and I'm also a recent founder of a magazine called Yep Yep. And
Hi, hello? Can you hear me?
yeah.
Hi.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Tang. I'm an artist, and I work primarily with like long form and long-term projects. My work is very installation and site-specific based. I also do a bit of sound work. I write poetry as well to supplement the images that I create.
Hi, I'm Feng Ho Yin from Hong Kong Open Print Shop. I do design, I do photography, especially in alternative processes, and I do prints, and been teaching at the university for quite a while.
Hello, I'm Lao Ching Ping. I'm a photographer, designer, and now I'm the current chair of Hong Kong International Photo Festival. Yeah.
Great.
Cool. I think we were discussing, maybe we can start by talking about sort of the evolution of contemporary photography and what it means to each of us in our own practices.
Right. Oh.
Maybe you can start
Okay,
again.
I'll take the lead. Okay. So I guess for me, I actually picked up photography quite late in life. So I was never formally trained. Like I didn't go to an art school for undergrad. So I think the contemporary photography realm actually fits my practice really well because I never really learned the rules. So to me, like sort of anything goes. I deal mostly with digital photography formats. And between shooting commercial work and my own personal stuff, I realized that there's not a lot of opportunities to see my work in print. I guess for most people here, like you're consuming imagery through Instagram, through your computer screen, and perhaps with I'm not like a Gen Z young person, so I do like having something tangible. So for me, I think that's what sort of inspired me to launch a magazine that's in print. And I think that, I think like, it suits my practice. Yeah.
Cool.
And, what about you?
So I've been practicing, I've been doing photography. I do commercial and editorial work for about 6 years now, full time. But also on the side, in the last maybe about 3 to 4 years, I've been focusing also a lot on my own fine art practice. And I also, like you, I didn't go to art school. I actually studied psychology, and I minored in art. In university. So actually my focus and my interest has always been, the human mind and human behavior, and sort of playing that observer role. So I think my background or an interest in just human behavior in general, and psychology, I think, is predominantly what informs my practice today, which is, I think, interesting because I also minored in photography in university. So I also learned how to, I started with black and white photography. I started with the dark room. So even though I shoot predominantly in digital now for most of my work, most of my practice and the way that I approach my projects are very analog, if that makes sense. So I usually have a very slow process. I like to take my time. I usually like to return to one place over and over and over again over the span of like 2 to 3 years sometimes. And in recent years, I've done a few exhibitions and shown some of my work, and a lot of them tend to focus on that same practice of returning to one place over and over again and learning how to see the same thing in completely different ways.
Well, to me, photography is photography. There's nothing called contemporary or not. It's not like music. You have classical music and things like that. So, and nowadays, to me, photography is so, as we just discussed, its spectrum is so wide. And so, to me, because I'm a Hong Kong-raised guy, so even if I want to learn photography then, there was no place, there's no such photography courses, there's no photography school, there's no photography gallery, no photography museum. Those are the things I observed. So I learned photography just in the context of design, because I was trained as a designer. And then later on, when I have this opportunity to go to London, I got in touch with historical processes and alternative process. That's why I kind of like the constraint and the time that you have spent on printing it all out, because usually some of my images I spent from shooting to finishing the print, it took me something like usually months, because I have to translate the image from then analog to, because this historical process you have to be contact printed. So the negative is as big as the image, so I have to do this such enlargement, and then I have to print with this sort of long process. So it allowed me to think a lot in between the processes. And usually they're more scrap than finished products. So there's quite a kind. I just enjoy this time spent with the piece. So that's why I love the alternative processes. So I think Qingping will have a lot to say about this kind of processes. Over to you.
Okay. I also enjoy making prints, and the time I studied photography, Hong Kong only have the kind of photography course in applied photography. These courses in Hong Kong Polytechnic that I think the design of the course is not making art, it's about commercial photography. I think it's the 80s in Hong Kong. Yeah.
To serve the industry.
To serve the industry, not the art market.
Artistic development.
Yes, and no photo museum, no photo festivals. And but nowadays, I think the contemporary art and contemporary photography is really popular. Even I know many commercial photographers in Taiwan want to enter the art market. Yeah, how to be an art photographer. For me, the contemporary photography is about everything. I think everyday life, and I don't want to define what is contemporary, but I think I always enjoy to have new ideas about things. I think that's contemporary photography, and also I'm not sure if I'm just too old to be a photographer. That I really enjoy making prints. You can see the print I made is a bit large in size. Because of the size and the quality I want, I think it's, as I said before, it is a historical moment to have contemporary photography that we can use both digital and analog technology. And I really enjoy making prints with really nice camera. I'm using a medium format camera, 4x5. I'm still using film. It's not about oh, you are so trendy to still shooting with film. It is because I want to have really, really high resolutions. The resolution I want is maybe more than 16K. When you wheel a pin with such a short distance with your eyes, you can really smell the paper, right? I really want to smell the paper with a really nice loop to see every details of the images. I think this is still, I can't use a digital camera to do that, compared with a traditional film camera. And also, the film and also the post-production on the images on paper. Nowadays, we can have really great scanner and inkjet machine to make archival print on really nice paper, like washi paper, rice paper, and that's the thing that I really enjoy to have it as my work. Yeah. So, and also the Cyanotype is also one of the very trendy things in nowadays, right?
Yeah. But most of these cyanotype they done, it's not on a very film-based process. Usually they do with objects and on
Or maybe for the
fabrics.
audience, like maybe you could explain what a cyanotype is.
You go ahead.
No, normally we have some, the process is like doing a photogram, right?
Yeah.
Use a real object with
Contact printing.
contact print with the sunlight, and with a really short or long exposure on a
Depending
on a
on
dye.
because it reacts with UV light, the sun.
UV light.
So normally when I do in Hong Kong summer, it's like 8 to 10 minutes. Sunny days, cloudy days is hard to tell. And by the way, cyanotype is one of the first processes, photographic processes, that was invented in the 19th century in 18. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's 1842, I think, by English guy called Herschel. So the reason why we call it cyanotype is because it's only generate images in blue, Prussian blue. So that's why the name cyan comes in. So cyanotypes is the only kind of blue images it come up. So it's a very old process, and then it slowly been applied in industrial and commercial process. That's why the term blueprint comes in, because it's a cheap process, and production and engineering, the engineer uses for production drawings. That's why. So cyanotype.
I remember there's a special kind of smell with the dye, right?
Yeah. Fortunately, it's not too toxic. Because the reason why these historical processes are so different from analog and digital, because if you guys have studied history, electricity comes in late in 19th century, and in the time when photography was invented, all photographic processes are not done in dark rooms because we don't have enlarger then. We don't have enlargers. We don't have dark rooms because dark room we rely on enlargers which operate with electricity.
Yeah.
So the only light source that is consistent is the sun. So those days only photography or photographic process is done by UV light by the guy upstairs.
Yeah.
So that's why. So all, and then because there's no negative yet, so every process has to be done contact printed. Up until there are terms like negative, because when it was invented, photography was invented, a French guy and an English guy invented photography on the same year. Qingping should know this much better. The French guy, Daguerre, invented a process called daguerreotype, which have no negative. everything is done positive on a piece of silver.
Silver. Okay.
The English guy Fox Talbot invented something which can be reproduced on a paper negative.
Right.
So that's when analog photography started to develop. That's when negatives appear. So you can. So the French process cannot be reproduced. The English process can be reproduced. So that's how the story goes.
Right.
This is my 2 cents.
Is it popular to have digital negative for cyanotype nowadays?
Nowadays you can.
Because it's easier nowadays, right?
Yeah. You can print out your negative onto transparencies through digital means. So that's why you can have digital negatives.
Yeah.
And then you can go back. That's how I do my printing.
Right.
So I can, with a digital image, I translate them into a negative, printing out on transparency, and then I use enlarged transparency to do my prints you see on the screen. That's how my process.
Stephanie, how do you make your print of the moon?
They're digital prints, archival ink on paper. I think it's really interesting because I think like you guys are definitely like you come from a very technical and like tactile kind of background.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas I think like you touched on 2 very important things about photography, light and life. So I think you mentioned life and you mentioned light. And I think that that's essentially like I think how I view my own practice. Like photography is so much more than just a tool. You know, it's so much more than just a tool or like a device to capture an image, even though, you know, everyone nowadays, we're all so familiar with photography. We all have a camera literally in our pockets at all times. And I think, to me, I think, honestly, it doesn't really matter the actual device that you use, although I appreciate large format, I appreciate, you know, that level of quality and definition, but I really think photography is about the way you see the world and how the world looks to you and how you want and what you want to say through your images and what story are you trying to tell. How does it reflect our times that we live in right now, and how do we process emotions that we feel in today's time, especially, you know, in the last few years. I think we're all, you know, stuck in this this really suffocating time, I think, both in Hong Kong and just, you know, in the rest of the world as well. So I think for me, like, because I have the psychology background, like to me, I think a lot of the problems I see in the world, I see a lot of mental health issues, and we have a mental health crisis right now. We have a crisis of loneliness. We have a crisis of isolation. And even though, you know, photography is a very solitary practice, we're always alone, you know, when we're shooting or when we're printing and you're working in the dark room. And that's part of the reason why, like, I think I fell in love with it, fell in love with the magic of photography, because it's a very introspective process. It's a conversation that you're having with yourself. Yeah. But also you need to be able to print it in physical form in order to communicate whatever you're trying to say to people who don't understand you. Yeah. So I think, so I think like the concept and like the way that you see the world is really what defines sort of, although again, like I think there's no need to define what is contemporary or not, but I think contemporary photography encompasses sort of the evolution of photography, right? It has the whole historical story of it, so.
So, I mean, you created a body of works digitally, and you kind of took the next step to print them. I think there's a lot of, I guess, regular people out there who, you know, have shot a bunch of stuff, but taking the next step to create a print could be very intimidating. Yeah. You know, you guys talk about your processes. Yeah. You obviously need a lot of space, a lot of technical know-how to create your cyanotypes and whatnot. And yourself, you know, I know you work with a gallery, so you do have these means to showcase your work, right? Which then would push you to create these prints. Yeah. So I'm just wondering, though, like, what do you guys feel for the average person who, you know, created all these beautiful images, but like they don't really have a platform to show it other than Instagram or, you know, a website? Like how can that regular photographer sort of take the next step to showcase their work, though?
I mean, to me, just like Stephanie said, photography or art to me is more therapeutical than communication, should I say. I mean, as an artist of photography, I'm the first person that I am more concerned of rather than showing up to people. As I said, my images are more like byproducts rather than the end to the means. So I enjoy the process. I mean, why we're human? Because we have culture. Animals don't create art. Animals don't have culture as such. So we have to make something. That's like 70 or Kenny said, we have something tactile. So historical process is all a tactile process. Everything, you have the chemical, you have the paper, you have the sunlight, and then you have the activities in between. Digital doesn't necessarily have all these processes and equipments and whatnot. Yep. So those to me are probably justify the process or the art that I'm doing. So having a print out there is a plus or a bonus to me. That's how I interpret my photography.
So you would have created your work even if you had no place to show it.
Yeah. Yeah, this inner joy that's like Stephanie just mentioned.
True, yeah.
It's actually very comforting.
Yeah, no, I feel exactly the same way. Like, I think even if there is an audience of 0 and just 1, which is myself, the person who's creating it, then you know that you really love something because you actually love it.
And then you have a sense of achievement.
Yes.
It's quite fulfilling.
Yeah,
that way. Yeah,
and you love the process, you love the meaning behind it. Like, just a brief thing, but like also I think photography for me is like a metaphor for life. And I say this a lot, because I think, when you look at, and I always like begin with, if I do workshops or whatever, like I always start by teaching black and white photography first, even on an iPhone, even if it's not the traditional way. But I think learning how to see the world monochromatically and learning how to see, because black and white photography is basically all about light and shadow. Yeah. And you have to, and that is like the beginning point, I think, of like how you learn to see the world differently. Yeah. And then you slowly, through developing a sensitivity to light and shadow and darkness, that is how you can develop a style or like something that really pulls you to, whether it's abstract things or whether it's everyday everyday life, or it could be the subject almost doesn't matter, but I feel like it's how you compose that image. And I think even the language around photography I think is really interesting, because when you look at framing, zooming in and out, like all these, the language around photography is very metaphorical, and like to me it's like almost like a philosophy. Like it reminds me to not zoom in too much and to sometimes learn to zoom out. Sometimes when we fixate too much on little things, we get sort of too obsessed, or like we get inundated by all these things in life. So I quite enjoy that.
I think it's a process to talk to myself. It's some kind of meditation.
Yeah, it
and
is.
When you take a photo with your iPhone and you sit later, 1 day later, 2 days later, or 1 year later, you start to talk to yourself and have some self discovery process. And I think you can share photo with your own self is very enough. And if you want to share with others, you ask about the opportunity for the new photographer, young photographer in Hong Kong, how to start, how to share photos with others. Maybe you have a body of works, you cannot show it to the gallery owners. But I suggest you can go to, for example, to share with your portfolio to the other photographers, your friends. Then you can attend so many open call in Hong Kong, like the photo festival, satellite show. I think lots of opportunity to start your first show. Actually, I'm I think it's really good to everyone to try a solo to start. And after the show, you can really understand why and how you do photography like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think just to come in on what Stephanie just said, teaching people photography is more like empowering them. It's more like any other media of art. You give them a media of expression, and there you go. You go and whether it's a pencil that you can do poetry, a camera that you can do photography, a brush that you can do paintings, and I think it's on that same level to me.
Yeah.
Right. Just a thought that came up. You know, you guys were talking about contemporary photography. I feel like with contemporary photography, there's so much freedom to draw from so many different mediums and inspiration. Like, you know, with the internet, with Photoshop, like you could literally do anything you want, right? So, like, you know, you love your pictures to be like super sharp, like, and you know, it's very technical, like it's very academic, but at the same time, you could like completely go the other spectrum in the contemporary side of things.
Yeah.
Like you could go, you know, for my magazine, for example, I worked with like 9 different Hong Kong artists, some of whom are photographers, you know, represented by galleries, but there's this one guy, like, Lai Lon Hin, who I think spoke last year, and like he only does things with his iPhone.
Yes.
Right? And when he sent me his files, they were like literally like 40 KB, you know, and like super low res, but that's exactly why his photos are so beautiful, because, you know, they're kind of blurry, kind of pixelated. But if you have a strong concept, strong narrative, I think that kind of that's what people will notice first, and not so much about like, oh, this thing is super sharp over here. So I think like that's, you know, it's a good thing for young photographers to realize that you don't, like, if you want to be super technical, go for it. But if you want to be like, you know, just shooting with your iPhone, go for it too. And I think there's just so much freedom. It's so democratic nowadays that it's like everybody could do great stuff. You know, but I think like the concept has to be there. Like, you know, you seem like a very conceptual. Like you kind of think about what you want to say. So I think that's more important.
Yeah, and especially
but I think what Hong Kong lacks is probably a platform for photographers, young and new, which you can communicate and share and discuss and whatnot. Just like Chimping said, photo galleries or photo museums are lacking in Hong Kong. So generally Hong Kong, the photography culture in Hong Kong is not there yet, comparing to other international cities or you know.
How so though?
Sorry?
Like how so? Like how is it not there yet?
We talk about clients. We talk about how people value photography, commercially or professionally, as well as in the art world. I mean, it's not generally that kind of circulation of information photographically. That's what I mean. I mean, I don't know. I've been out of the market for so long. I don't. Chimping would be better to speak about sort of like non-commercial photography, maybe. I don't know.
I think
there used to be a community where Polly and Karsing was still in Hong Kong. They were starting something like that, but
but nowadays
ages ago.
people just said Karsing start too early because at 80s or the late 80s, Hong Kong still not start collecting photography.
Yeah,
collection. But nowadays, more and more young collectors that love to collect prints, photography, and actually it's a kind of young style of collecting things, and I think it's more people to collect just one edition, drawing, painting, sculpture, because photography is people may say it can reproduce, you can have many copies, so so that's the problem about the money market about it. Yeah.
Maybe it's a price thing too, right? Like, you know, the average person would be like, oh, I could like see these things for free on Instagram. Like, why would I want to pay for a print? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The same goes with picture and prints. You know, usually when people willing to pay more with a painting, and if it's a print, whether it's so sophisticated,
Right.
because it can be reproduced and there are additions, so they usually come in much lower kind of price range.
Yeah.
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 But things have changed now. Yeah.
Mm.
Even the,
I think-
I saw a Damon Hirst print there. Actually, it's a fat copy of his drawing. Yeah.
Right.
I think it's 1,000 copy of it. So I think the market changed and people
But
changed.
it's because it's Damien Hirst.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
You're buying the name, you're not buying the image.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think regardless of like how the market receives your work, again, it kind of all circles back to intention, right? Like what you were saying, concept, intention. I think if you really do have something to say, eventually the world will hear you at some point. If you yell loud enough into the abyss, I think someone, hopefully, you know, that's the hope. I think for any artist, or the struggle of any artist is that you hope that people will see something, you know, in what you're trying to say.
Yeah. And I think that's a growing sort of subculture of, you know, people making prints and zines, artists making their own like handmade books, for example, which is something that I've started to dabble with.
Yeah.
I, you know, spent the last few years walking around Shamshui Po, taking like just your everyday pictures, and like, you know, I have thousands of these photos. I'm like, oh, I don't know what to do with them. So then, you know, recently I flew back to Singapore to do an art fair, to a book fair. I was like, you know what, I'll just make something out of it. And it's actually, you know, so I created like 20 of these handmade books with things you could buy from a stationery store. And it's like kind of therapeutic, you know, just to like get your stuff printed and just going through the process of making something. And I think nowadays, there's definitely a pretty, like there's a growing sort of zine and handmade prints market,
there
which is
growing
cool.
trend for collecting photography artist book?
Is there a growing trend? I think so. I think people...
There's a market now, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Like everybody says print is dead, but actually I think it's quite lively.
Yeah, definitely.
It's there. I mean, it's not because a book, you know, how much is a book gonna cost, right? Like just a couple $100. It's not like a $10,000 framed thing. So I think it's more easily accessible as well. Like
Yes.
Right.
publication.
And also
format.
is a small printer or A4, A3 printer can make high quality archival print nowadays.
Right, yeah.
And really affordable for young artists.
Right.
And also, I think contemporary art is about idea. Yeah, I 100% agree. It's not about equipment. Another thing I love photography is we can use toy camera.
Yeah.
You don't even have an iPhone, you can make great works. Yeah.
Right.
So everyone can have tools that cost you just so little that you can enter it. And also, you don't have to take a degree. You don't have to take a decade to learn calligraphy. You can learn photography in a few days. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as a late starter, I learned a lot of my photography knowledge from YouTube.
Yeah.
But you know, it's
Yeah.
democratic,
The
and
resources
that's
are out
yeah,
there.
it's all
Yeah,
out there, right?
For sure. Yeah.
Again, it's just down to what you have to say, really.
Yeah. I think, shall I dip into
Why
the
not?
fishbowl for a question? We have these questions that people have given us. All right. Maybe
We talk about that. or-
we kind of already, well, okay. Which subcultures have an influence on your art genre, especially within Hong Kong's scene? Did we kind of already answer that? Subculture, zines,
Yeah,
zine culture.
young
Next
artists.
question.
Yeah.
What are your sources of inspiration? That's a good one. All right.
Okay. Oh, me.
Go for it.
I was born in Singapore. I grew up here in Hong Kong. I've lived in New York for over a decade. But at the end of the day, like Hong Kong is still home. So I find a lot of my inspiration from the streets of Hong Kong. It's a kind of cliche, but you know, between neighborhoods like Central or like Shanshoubo, like Yamade kind of areas, I do gravitate towards that old, grimy, like very classic Hong Kong streets. So you'd see that a lot of my photography, like even like my sort of fashion inspired editorials, those are done like around like Daigokzhou, Shanshoubo, industrial areas, because that, you know, there's just so much to see around there, and like you don't really have to compose your photos. Like literally, like everything could be a great like image, because there's just so much going on. Like there's so much color. Like people are interesting. It's just complete bombardment of your senses. So which is what I love about like hanging out in Shanshoubo. So a lot of my work actually is inspired by, you know, just streets of Hong Kong. Yeah.
Is it about old Hong Kong or Hong Kong with just? I think Hong Kong don't have orders, don't have a right order to have things. They all mix together.
Yeah,
like,
that's true. That's true.
Like the movies, like the Hong Kong movies, right? I think it's one of the kind in the world, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And
Stephanie?
I guess I sort of touched on a few sources of inspiration previously. Light, obviously, being the number one source of inspiration. I'm the kind of person that, you know, when I go out with a bunch of friends, like I'm always the one like left behind, like, and people like lose me, you know? They're like, oh, where'd she go? It's okay. She's just like obsessed with like one thing, like one corner, one patch of light, like reflecting off the window or something. So I think like the idea of chasing light and chasing that has led me to the projects that I've created in recent years. So just to give a slight example, my first solo show, I'm also showing the pieces here at Art Central this year. It's about the moon. The inspiration was the moon. Yeah. Which, I mean, countless artists in history have taken inspiration, have drawn inspiration from the moon. But it started with, you know, this time of feeling very alone in the world and feeling very isolated, removed. So I would go up to the rooftop of my building, slightly illegally. I would ask the security guard to give me a key to access the rooftop. And again, like I think a lot of photographers are very adventurous people. Like we like to find interesting ways to access like different points of view that are like new and exciting that no one has ever, you know, different vantage points. So I would be up on the rooftop, and this spanned across 3 years of me just going up every single time I feel sad, basically. I would go up, and that became my place of therapy, and it became, the darkness became my, you know, by sitting in the dark and by looking at the moon and photographing the moon, I found solace, which became the title of my body of work. And the sort of technique that I used was, it was just one night where it was a super moon, and I didn't know it was a super moon, and it was just rising literally behind the mountains, like in front of me. And I was just moved to tears. Like I was crying, I was listening to Philip Glass like on my headphones. Like I remember exactly the emotion that I had. And I was just like in tears, bawling by myself, like listening. And it was just so cinematic. And I started obsessively trying to photograph it, like, because that's a photographer's instinct is to capture the moment, right? So I tried to capture it. And over time, but I couldn't. I only had a 100 millimeter lens, which is not a telescopic NASA lens, right? So I can't capture how beautiful it was in front of me. So I started to experiment with, I was hand holding the camera, 100 millimeter, so it's a macro lens for those of you who aren't familiar. And then I would just sort of, you know, make like these round, I started playing with multiple exposures, and I was drawing in the sky, if you will. So using light as the canvas, or the sky as the canvas and the light as the paint. So then I created these like shapes in the sky, and you would sort of see these different moons, and I have to be very still, and it's very meditative, like you were mentioning. I almost had to hold my breath, because as soon as I would move a tiny bit too much, or if I would sneeze or something, then the whole composition wouldn't be perfect. And I was trying to, through this process, and a lot of trial and error in those 3 years of trying to photograph my way out of my depression, if you will.
So you just take one multi-exposure shot of each frame, right?
Yeah.
So that's why
yes. So
you
everything
put
is
it
done
in this order, right?
Yeah. So everything is done in camera. There's
not
almost
by
no
Photoshop.
post-production,
Not by Photoshop.
no
Okay.
Photoshop. It's
Oh,
all
okay.
done in camera. So I would basically, however many number of moons you see is the number of exposures that I made.
Okay.
This
So I
one
would go
also, right?
and then like
So
stop.
you have a very
This
steady
one.
hand.
Yeah, I had to train. I had to really not breathe, pretty much, like in that, if that, yeah. So and I think that was, it was just an interesting process for me, and I found my process through this body of work. Before that, I don't think I knew who I was as a photographer, because I would be interested in everything that the light touched, right? Like anything, and I think that was. Yeah, that was the beginning.
I wonder which piece of Philip Glass you are listening at that moment.
I'll show you later. We can have a Philip Glass listening session. Yeah. So how about you, your inspiration?
Well, to me, my photography would be probably like a secret garden. This some place I escape into, away from the hustle and bustles of daytime.
Yeah.
So you can see my images. I use multiple colors, very bright colors, because I like watercolor. Because these images, the color comes from watercolor. Watercolors are transparent. Transparent colors can overlap. So two colors overlap, there's 3 colors. 3 colors overlap, there will be 6 or 9 colors, things like that. So usually I have, because I do in layers, 1 color per layer, so usually I have 5 or 6 different colors. So you can, in terms, translate a lot of color out of it. So these are, most of the images I took on hiking around Hong Kong, and some of those are other sort of journeys overseas. So I just treat this as my way to escape from office work. That's my attitude towards my photography. Qingping.
My work there is about Hong Kong cityscape. Actually, I'm shooting the dying of Hong Kong, and where every people start talking about the city is different from the old Hong Kong. So I want to take as many details of the cities of it, and so I use a really technical way to do it, and make a large print of it. So that's all it's about. But you can see it from the projection, and also you can see the print, like how in print in a computer.
Right.
You have to see the real things.
Sarah?
Yeah, I think that's a good opportunity to open the floor to any questions that anyone has. Just raise your hand.
Hello, thank you for great sharing. And I feel I agree with you. I agree with all of you sharing because I feel photography to everyone is very unique experience. Even though I and my friend taking or looking at the same object, but because of our body height or personal experience, our ways of seeing is different. And my question maybe go to Kenny. Yeah, because I'm curious about when you taking a model, putting a model in the cityscape scenic, and what is can you share some experience of what is the when you invite a model in the cityscape, then when other photographer is taking the nature of the just the cityscape, what is the different experience or ways of seeing?
Right. Okay. So just like with anything, it takes practice. You know, the first time you work with a model is going to feel very awkward, very uncomfortable. But I think with repetition and you know, finding a model who obviously doesn't charge by the hour, so you get, you know, the full day to work with this person, and preferably someone you know, and you know, someone that you feel a connection with, because at the end of the day, like, working with another person is about the connection that you have with this person. I think both parties have to feel comfortable and at ease, and once you get that, then, you know, to me, it just kind of becomes second nature. Like, you just look through the viewfinder and you see a particular spot that you like, and I don't think you really need to think so much about the posing. Just kind of let everybody do their own thing. Just be natural and just click. Just go for it. You know, like if you need and that's the thing between like working with film or digital, right? Like film, you only have 36 shots, but with digital, like you could literally take hundreds of photos of like the same thing, but with like, you know, just small variations in the posing or the look. And then from there, you know, you go back, you're looking at which photos work and which ones don't. And with repetition, like you just kind of get a feel of what your style is and how to get people to sort of get into the position that you like. But it takes a lot of time, and it's about, yeah, building a connection with your subject. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Cool, I just got to let the brain catch up with me for a second here. When it comes to your subjective experience with representing your work, you know, you have your own individual intent. This is for everyone here. Now, when your work is now displayed to the public, that subjectivity and that intent is essentially thrown out the window unless they have this conversation with you. So how important is that for you as an artist to have the original intent remain versus what the public perception of that work is? You know, and perhaps this is another conversation with the ego of the artist in a commercial environment.
Yeah,
so thoughts on that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you touched on an interesting word, the ego of the artist. I think I guess for me, like, when I'm creating the work, it is all about me and the subject, right? It is that internal dialogue, and that very much is the focus, and that's the center. Like, that's my entire universe, like when I'm making something or in the process of creating that work. But like you said, you know, once it's shown to the public, it's completely open for interpretation. And I think all I can hope for is, and the moment of showcasing your work and presenting it in any form, whether it's in a zine or on a wall or anywhere, is the letting go of the ego. And I think that's why showing your work is very important. It's so important to not just let it sit on a phone or let it, you know, just collect, you know, or accumulate, because the act of showing and the act of presentation is the letting go of the ego, I think. And I think that process is both terrifying but also beautifully rewarding at the same time, to see whether or not your intention, or whether or not how true you are and how honest you are with yourself, whether or not that actually translates to the viewer when you listen to feedback or when you hear how other people are interpreting or seeing your work. So,
Yeah.
I think it's one of the rewarding moments that I can have audience with different view. Yeah, I really love the conversation with the viewers.
Yeah.
So I welcome the interpretation of my work. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have something to say about that too. So with the magazine, Yep Yep, with all these, I found a bunch of different artists with different practices. And a big risk that I took with the magazine is that there's actually no words in it. You only have the name of the artist, the title, followed by just pages of photos. There's some stuff that's very literal, but there's also a lot of conceptual artwork in there. And without any sort of explanation, it's completely up to the reader's interpretation of what it is. And I think that's a risk, but it's also a great thing because, first of all, you could give the works your own meaning, and I think that's more important actually than me shoving down your throat okay, this is what you need to think about my work, because I don't have that power on anybody. Everybody's going to interpret this color differently. You know what I mean? So I think giving the reader the power to give things meaning is actually a form of it's like a dance. It's an interaction, and that's something that I prefer. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree with all you guys. I mean, when you put your work out there, it's open for interpretation, whether they come in at your technique, your equipment, your resolution and whatnot. And that's why most of my work are untitled. So you guys are it's open for you to come in and interpret whether those with special meaning to me, I would put in a title as a caption, just to contextualize what I want, specific angle or entry point that you want people to access your work. That's how I do it. Yeah.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you to the panel. A quick question about the platforms. And as technology evolves, how you see photography evolving in terms of showcasing the work of the artists? I mean, someone said in the 60s that the medium is the message. And as technology evolves, it's a different medium, the platforms. How do you see that evolving? Do you see that photography will be mostly on screen, will be still on print, will be books?
I think seeing things in physical form will never die. I think that is something that is forever. I think no matter how technology continues to evolve, whether it's showing it in NFTs or all these trends or things happening today, I think there's nothing that can replace the human experience, if you will. That's
I think that reminds me of a sentence from 70s. The media is the message. You will know better than I do. Marshall McLuhan. Because he said, actually, the media actually carry more messages than the work itself. So then it was whether it's a hot media or cold media. That's how I learned my. So sometimes media do have to carry weight and intentions and whatnot. I mean, to me, if you were sliding a work on the iPhone, it's quite different from you seeing on physical up on a wall. And then
unless the artist intends on it being shown.
Yeah, it's part of the work. It's part of the artistic decision, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I mean, if it's on a screen, nowadays you can blow it up hundreds and thousands times, and then sometimes you cannot justify the artistic decision or the intention of the artist if it's on screen, and of course, sometimes it totally fits the artist's intention. That's my take on the issue. I mean, it's because I think the art making process, the artists do have to make decisions along the way, starting from what kind of film you're going to use, what kind of equipment you're going to use, the speed of film you're going to apply for. I mean, I'm sure Qingping will try to use as low as possible film for the resolution, and sometimes people will want to have, as high speed as you want to when you're shooting the moon. I mean, those are decisions that you have to make along the way, down to the frame, down to the height you're going to mount your work onto, and so I think that would be. I don't know if it answers your question or not.
I want to thank our speakers. I'm going to volunteer them as well. If you are too shy to ask them a question, approach them later or like after this talk. But join me in thanking them for this talk.